Christ is said by 3 of the 4 evangelists to have been asked what is the greatest commandment. Christ responded that the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, and, what is like it, to love your neighbour as yourself. The first part is a quotation from Deuteronomy. The second part is Christ's commentary by inference. It is a quotation from Leviticus. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. Deuteronomy 6:4-5. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbour as yourself. Leviticus 19:18. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. The 2 statements do not coexist in this specific relationship in the Old Testament. The way that Christ combined them results in a new statement, very central to Christianity, that to love your neighbour is the same as loving God with all your heart. That is what we normally mean when we speak of Christian faith, at least in the Orthodox way. In St. Paul's words, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. How is the second commandment equivalent to the first? If God is to be loved, so must we love all those with whom his knowledge is shared, and we must share what knowledge is given us by God, which is all we have, with other human beings, as if it was as valuable to them as it is to us. That is not always the understanding of faith by many American Christians, especially Protestants. To American Protestants, faith appears to mean simply believing in God, full stop, or perhaps full question mark. There is no connection of the Great Commandment to the follow-up statement that Christ made about loving our neighbor. Some American Protestants seem hostile to logical argumentation and see the Bible as a book of signs and oracles. Faith in God is instead understood as believing that the stories of the Old Testament must be believed as something literally spoken by God himself, as historical facts or revelations, despite the inconsistencies and self-contradictions. To their defense, one must admit that the saints often use such argumentation, for example, that the coming of Christ was prophesied in the Old Testament. This has been used in defending Christianity against Islam because Muhammad was not prophesied in the Old Testament. However, one does not need to adhere to a literal belief in the texts, only in that there were such beliefs, and the beliefs in the case of Christ were fulfilled. In the Orthodox approach, it need not be assumed that the context of the Old Testament should be taken as true, established historical facts. Such literal belief in the text would presumably include a belief in Noah literally saving all the earth's animals, millions of species, across 6 continents from a deluge that is said to have submerged the earth's surface for 40 days. Moreover, it turns out that the story of Noah existed in other traditions external to Judaism, that it was a myth passed around from one people to another. A literal reading of Genesis 1 presumably also tells us that extinct species, such as the dinosaurs, became extinct about a day after they were created, as their remnants do not coexist with human remains. It is sufficient that the authors of the Old Testament, who were living in the dark ages of the dimmest antiquity, were ignorant of a lot for creationists of our own time to disregard current encyclopedic knowledge. Ostensibly, in the name of Christianity, American Protestants want to defend a literalist reading of the Bible before having gone as far as reading literally the opening paragraph of the Gospel of St. John. The Orthodox view is instead expressed in the following words by St. John Chrysostom. In times past, humankind was even less developed and not capable of grasping the meaning of that which is the most perfect. To remedy the weakness of his audience, the Holy Spirit caused the prophet to speak in the language that has been recorded in the Scriptures. And so that you understand that he compromised the telling of the story because of the imperfections of his audience, see how St. John the Evangelist, when that time or higher virtue had come, not following that road, led instead the audience to a higher teaching. He said, in the first principle, there was Logos, and Logos was unto God, and God was Logos. Christ said that he came to fulfill or complete the Testament. St. Paul commented, when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Ideas from other churches are sometimes foreign to orthodoxy and sometimes opposed to orthodox belief. The holy book one finds on the altar of an Orthodox church is that of the four Gospels. It is read in services to inspire with its examples and parables. Loving our neighbour explains what faith in God means, a faith in the charitable sharing of life and knowledge, such as when a pestilence, for example, is defeated through reason, knowledge, and human fellowship, which are gifts from God. To be a Christian should mean to regard every other human being not simply as an equal, but with charity and compassion. We should not extend charity to others just because of some human rights charter. Such did not even exist before Christianity. We are not affording rights to others only to minimize a risk of injustice to ourselves. To love our neighbor is our faith. In addition, prayer guides us to improve ourselves and through our own improvement also the society around us, and to love all that is given the gift of knowledge, all living things. During fasting, ordinary Orthodox Christians adopt what in modern terms would be called a vegetarian diet, while Orthodox monks adopt what in current terminology would be called a vegan diet, because to know and to love is a gift from God. As to love God with all our heart was equated by Christ to loving our fellow human beings as ourselves, so salvation through the Church is understood by Orthodox Christians as inseparable from human fellowship, compassion, forgiveness, and charity. St. John of Damascus considered a life in God to be filled with joy, and a distancing from God to be a hell. Compassion and a participation in humanity and participation in the body of the Church are blessings not in some distant future, but now and always.